My name's Lee and I'm a member of the Hub Church and also a recovering alcoholic. Over the next few minutes I'd like to introduce you to the 12-step program that has transformed my life and hopefully it will transform some of yours too.
Thank you, Ian. I've noticed when everybody comes up to give testimony or share that they bring a book with them. Being a typical alcoholic, I've brought two. So we're going to talk this morning a little bit about the 12 steps of AA, and I want to talk about how I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and how I brought the steps into my life, which has built for me a much better, more spiritual and happier life. So if I could have the next slide, please. So this is what is promised at AA. You know, by working the steps, by changing our lives, by changing our habits, that we can build a better, sober and more spiritual life. Yeah. So if we could move on one more, please. So I'm Lee, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm proud to say that I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful that I'm an alcoholic. You know, when I first got into recovery, I heard people in AA saying that, and I thought, well, I'm not grateful to be an alcoholic. I'll never be grateful to be an alcoholic. But I am. You know, without being an alcoholic, I won't have paid the membership to get into such a fabulous fellowship, and it's also brought me closer to God. And one of the things that we get in AA is a primary purpose, which is to stay sober and to carry the message to the still suffering alcoholic. Yeah. And the still suffering alcoholic may not be drinking, it may be somebody part of the fellowship that needs some help and guidance. Yeah. And before I got into recovery, I had no purpose really. On the outside everything looked great. You know, I had a family, a good job, a good career, quite a lot of money. But inside I was lost. I was emotionally, spiritually and physically bankrupt. You know, and without having my sort of epiphany or my moment, you know, I probably wouldn't be here. I drunk from the age of about 17 to 41, pretty much. Certainly the last few years it was every day, and it was an awful place to be. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in step one. I'd like to, if we could just move on, Dave, I'd like to talk just a little bit briefly about what Alcoholics Anonymous is. It was founded in 1935, 10th of June, that's AA's birthday, 1935, by a gentleman called Bill Wilson, better known as Bill W, because Alcoholics Anonymous is designed that we can protect our anonymity. It's a very important part. And it was in Akron, Ohio. Alcoholics Anonymous came to the UK in 1947, and next year we celebrate 75 years of AA in the UK. This book, right? I was inspired a little bit when Jim was talking last week about the importance of the Bible as a book, and he mentioned that I think it was Harry Potter that was the second bestseller, before The Hobbit and then Harry Potter. I don't know how many copies of these have been sold. I guess AA doesn't necessarily publish that, but for me, alongside the Bible, this is the most important book in my life. This saved my life. And it's been rewritten, but the first 164 pages in here, and I will refer to bits in the book. The first 164 pages has never been changed. Why change something that's working? Some of my friends that are not in recovery, that are not in the fellowship, when I tell them that I've been sober for the amount of years that I've been, they say, and they know that I've come to AA, they're surprised when they hear that I've still come to AA. And the reason I do that is because it's a fellowship, it's where I got sober, it's where I can carry that message and do the primary purpose. So I feel really grateful and privileged to be able to be up here today. And the fellowship is based on the 12 steps, which is my second book. Right? So the 12 steps of AA. They're all in the big book, but they've been written in more detail in here because there's a few of the steps that really didn't have much detail in the big book, and I will talk about that further down the series of looking at the steps. So, and it's based on service, love and unity. And that's been very important to me. You know, the service part is helping to run the meetings. The love was something I'd lost. I'd lost love for myself and for my fellow human being. You know, the illness of alcoholism, and it is an illness. took me, I was become just so self-centered. It was all about me. It was all about me getting a drink. My first waking thought was, where's my drink coming from? How am I going to get it? So anyway, let's have a look at the steps. So if we could have a look at the first step, please, Dave, that'd be great. So it says, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. And one of the first things that was pointed out to me was it says we. We admitted we. It's not I've got to admit, you've got to admit, it's we. And I learned through the 12-step program that I can't do life on my own. I'm not very good on my own, actually. I don't like being lonely. I don't like sitting around doing nothing. And I like the connection. In my phone, I've got hundreds of phone numbers, and probably 75-80% of them are people in recovery. There's some, probably sadly, that needed recovery that didn't quite get it, because not everybody does, and that is a shame, but we're there for everybody, whether they get it or not. So I could see that alcohol was a problem for me. I could see that my life was unmanageable. And it got to a day in February, 21st of February 2005 is my sobriety day, and I feel that that's the day I was reborn. That's when something told me that life had to change. I was away, I'd been separated from my family, I was still working, didn't like my job, and I got to the stage where I didn't really care about myself anymore. I'd rather have not been here. But on that morning, something happened. I got to the stage where I really did consider ending it all. But for some reason, I think God was looking after me. Somebody did speak to me and suggested that I rang the AA helpline. Now, I'd not heard of Alcoholics Anonymous before. If somebody had suggested it to me, I just wasn't listening. I tried therapy, I tried all sorts of things, but anything but stopping drinking. And I picked up the phone, I rang the AA helpline that's still there. It's now online as well. You've got an online chat on AA. And I was encouraged to go to a meeting that evening here in Bishop's Stortford, in another church hall. Most AA meetings, most fellowship meetings are in churches and church halls that they support us. And it was a step meeting. I had no idea what a step meeting was about, I had no idea about the 12-step program, but when I walked in that room, there was something that was there. There was something warm, something loving, there was laughter, and I hadn't laughed for quite some time. So I listened, and then I looked at step one, and I looked at the chaos in my life. I looked at the fact that, every time I tried to stop drinking, I couldn't stop, and the fact that it had been very easy for me to buy alcohol. I had an expense account at work, and everything was very easy to get it. And other people that like to drink like me. And I've learned that those friends, sadly, have had to go from my life. They weren't friends, they were just fellow drinkers. And this is why I think sort of step two, if we could move on, Dave, step two sort of came, it says in step two, we came to believe in a power greater than ourselves that can help restore us to sanity. Now, I've also heard in AA that I'm allergic to alcohol. This was one of the things that really helped me. I've got an allergy to alcohol. I wasn't very happy with that, because that meant I can't drink alcohol. But if I had an allergy to nuts, I certainly wouldn't have had any problem not eating nuts. But that allergy thing really did help me. And it also said that we came to believe in a power greater that could help us. Because I'd be insane, wouldn't I, if I carried on drinking alcohol knowing that I'm allergic to it. And I like the fact it really helped me, because, as I say, I'd lost my faith. I'd been christened when I was a boy, but my faith became alcohol. I thought alcohol was my best friend. So I was, I had a faith before, so I knew that I could maybe find faith again. And it says we came to believe in a power greater. I didn't have to find it immediately. I rushed off trying to decide what I was going to have, what was going to be my higher power. And it was suggested to me at the beginning that I could look at AA and the fellowship as my higher power. Here was a group of people not drinking and had a happier life. I thought, I can go along with that. And then there's that acronym, God. Could we hit God's written throughout the step? God, group of drunks. It worked really, really well for me. So they kept coming back. People just said, just don't drink one day at a time. Get to a meeting and just keep coming back and your life will change, it will get better. About 6 or 7 months in, without having a drink, I wouldn't say I was particularly sober. You know, I still had all my emotions that I couldn't regulate, still had all the problems, wasn't getting what I originally come into AA for, I wasn't getting those things back, but I hadn't had a drink. And I was getting to that stage where I really needed further help, further support. I needed to start doing the 12 steps. I needed to find a sponsor and go through the 12 steps, because that's what AA does. You find sponsors, somebody who's going to guide you through the steps, how they were guided, you know. And the beauty of the 12-step program is not rigid. It can be worn like a loose cloak. It's really not rigid. It's as is your own understanding of God within the terms of AA. And you know, so I was able. I thought I can believe, and I got a sponsor and started formally going through the steps with him, and I'm privileged now that I've been able to sponsor people through the 12 steps, and I've changed careers. I'm now a psychotherapist. I have worked in the city in the financial markets. I work in addiction. I've moved away a little bit from addiction now to do general psychiatry, and my life has changed. I never imagined that I'd end up there. I never imagined actually that I'd end up here in the church, talking to you guys on a Sunday morning either, but I feel really grateful and privileged to do that. If we could just move on to step 3, the next slide. I'm conscious of time, and you know, because for me it's been, you know, I've been sober 16 years. I've been building this program into my life over 16 years, and trying to talk to you about these first 3 steps, which are as important as all the others in 15 minutes, is quite a tough ask. So anyway, as I said, so it sits in step 3, make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. You know, and I this was probably the hardest step for me, because I like to be in control of everything. I was very willful. It was Lee's way or everything else. I didn't read this right when I first read it. I thought I've got to hand all control, absolutely of everything, over to a God. And that's not actually what it says. You know, I'm actually really handing my willfulness over to God, so that I don't act on my, you know, Jim said it before, that sometimes we make bad decisions sometimes, don't we? Because we, you know, drunk. So there was a period of my life where I was playing God. And that is one of the things that AA taught me to realise, actually, you're not godly. You know. And what I also had to do was, rather than chase God, search for God, you know, God wasn't lost. I was the one who was lost. You know, I just had to let Him in. And it was the love in the fellowship that helped me allow God into my life. And you know, and so now my life has changed immeasurably. And because I don't try to take control of everything, I simply let things be most of the time. I'm far from perfect. I did think before I came into AA I was pretty perfect, which is really ridiculous when I look back at all the chaos and all the drinking, but I was far from perfect. And I'm glad. Because, I'll tell you what, it's really difficult trying to be perfect, especially when you were drinking every day. It's really, really difficult. So now, I accept that I'm far from perfect. I allow myself to make mistakes. I try not to make terrible mistakes, or I try not to repeat them. Really, I think that's what it's about. You know, I'm allowed to make a mistake, I just don't keep repeating it. So part of the essence of the 12-step program and of AA is to keep things simple. You know, it's actually a very simple program actually for complicated people. You know, so if I can keep it simple, then I'm in a good space. Now, you can sum up the first 3 steps in one word each, I think. So step 1 was acceptance. I needed to accept. So it's a weird admitted bit for me. I've had to accept that I'm an alcoholic. Step 2 is hope. You know, there's a solution there. And there's a whole chapter in the book called There's a Solution. There's also a chapter called How It Works. There's also a chapter for the agnostic agnostics and the atheists, the people that don't believe in God. AA's even written a whole chapter on that. And lastly, step 3 is, for me, is willingness.
Yeah.
Being willing rather than being willful. Having come to believe in a higher power, it's about, well, let him guide me. So it's basically, and also it can be summed up as a step 1, I can't. Step 2, he can. Step 3, then let him.
Yeah.
So that's a very, very brief synopsis of the first 3 steps and how I feel that they've come into my life. I'd like, if I may, just to, no idea of the time, I'm trying to see the clock in the background. I'd like to, if maybe we could just finish with a couple of prayers. And when we look at some of the later steps, step 11 is about getting a closer contact with the God of your understanding through prayer, meditation, etc. But step 3 has its own prayer. And so step 3 prayer goes like this. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may be better. I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power. Thy love and thy way of life, may I do thy will always. Amen. And the last prayer I'd like to share with you is a prayer that we say at the end of every AA meeting, the Serenity Prayer. And this was a prayer that I think sums up everything for me. This was a prayer that saved my life. I used to say, repeat it over and over again, sometimes through gritted teeth, sometimes willingly, but I know if I just say this on a daily basis, my life is so much easier. So it says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It sums it all up for me. And so thank you very much. It's been a real privilege to speak to you this morning. I'm going to leave this stage with a full and thankful heart for all your fellowship, the fellowship of AA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony, for the welcome. It's been it's a privilege to be able to speak to all my friends in church, and there's some extra friends with us today from the fellowship. It's really nice to have you here as well, and support me and to support yourselves and to get a closer contact with your higher power. Dave, if I could have the first slide, please. That's the one. And if we could move on to the next one. So that's great. So we did, as Tony said, we did the first 3 steps about 4 weeks ago, which where we learnt that we are alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. That probably no human being could have relieved our alcoholism, and that God could and would himself. And I was actually thinking when Ian, we was praying earlier, and Ian mentioned that this week it had been, I think you said there'd been a bit more of you rather than God. And this is really what these steps are about. It's about being less about me and more about God. And, and the illness of alcoholism, alcohol, the first part of it is really just a symptom. The important part is the ism, is I, self and me. So this is what I want to talk about today. So if I could have the next slide, please, Dave. So we're going to start with step 4, which I can remember when I first saw the scrolls of the steps up in the meeting rooms of AA. I looked at that one and thought, made a searching and moral inventory of ourselves. Wow. Because at that stage, it wasn't my fault. It was everybody else's fault. So I was great at taking everybody else's inventory and not my own. And it was a bit. And when I started eventually doing this, and these steps are the action steps. This is what is going to relieve me from the bondage of self. I suddenly discovered that I was full of what we would probably call the 7 deadly sins, which I think is on the next slide, don't you? So I was full of pride, greed, lust, anger, gluttony and sloth and envy. And all these things led to me wanting to resent everybody else, blame everybody else, try to make everything perfect. And we were singing earlier, wasn't we, really, that we know there's only one person who's perfect. And this was part of my problem, because I thought I was perfect. I wanted the world to be perfect. I had a great big ego, huge amounts of grandiosity, but also very low self-worth. As soon as something didn't go my own way, the fear would come in. It would affect my pride. And it says in the reading in the 12 by 12 that pride heads the list of seven deadly sins. Certainly does for us alcoholics, I think, and it certainly did for me. So the process of doing step 4 is to do it with a sponsor. I spoke a little bit about sponsorship last time. So it's going away and actually having a look at all of my resentments. All the people that I blamed were on my list. All the institutions that I blamed for not recognising me in my career were on the list. People that I was envious of were on the list. And then the idea, so it started off, well, that's great, I can write down, I can blame them, I can do this, I can do that. But then the last part of it is looking at my part in it. Looking at my defects of character, looking at what I played in the breakdown of relationships, or what I played in my part in not getting the career that I thought I deserved. And that was a real eye-opener, but also extremely liberating. And I took my time because it was something that I didn't particularly, partly because I was procrastinating, didn't really want to do it, partly because I wanted to get it perfect, and partly because there was bits that I didn't want to write down, to be honest. There was bits that I didn't want to write down. And I had to analyse myself. And I began to not like the person that I used to be. Right? But what I'd seen in the fellowship of AA was people change. They told me they'd change, because they had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps, which we'll come to in step 12. Because of the important part, I was spiritually broken. I was physically and mentally broken, but more importantly, I was spiritually broken. By the time I'd actually been able to practice the first few steps, and I hadn't drunk for a while, the physical side was beginning to return. But the mental side and the emotional side was getting worse. Because I couldn't control my emotions because of all these things. Because I was still self-centred. It was still all about me. I'd been sober for 6 or 7 months and I hadn't got back what I wanted. My motivation coming into AA was to get things back. And that wasn't happening. So, having done this moral inventory, I then have to move on to step 5, Dave. Admitted to God, to ourselves and to another human being the exact nature of my wrongs. So now I've got to tell somebody and God about all the things that I've done. Having written them all down, or most of them down, because there was things that I'd left out which I didn't realise until I actually sat down with my sponsor and did my step 5. I think subconsciously I knew I hadn't put everything down in writing. Some of it were just different examples of things and behaviour, but there was 1 or 2 things that I thought, maybe I won't. But I had such a good experience when I sat down with my sponsor and he told me some of the things that he'd done. So I suddenly realised I wasn't alone in my thinking, my actions and my behaviour. So I did tell him a couple of things that I had maybe intended to hold back. And I'm so grateful that I found the courage to do that. Because it's about, because it was about me learning. So this was me sort of cleaning my side of the street, I suppose, cleaning the wreckage of my past. So I wouldn't then be hanging on to all the resentments, the blaming everybody else. I could see my part in it. So I thought, well, I can change my part in it. I can change me. I can change how I react to the other people and to the institutions and to the places. So, and it's really quite interesting. So, we pretty much, the step 4 and step 5 are great steps because once you've done them, you've done them. Right? We have a step 10 further down the line when we can look at our inventory and what we're doing once we've gone past this process, provided we have done it thoroughly and completely. So I do regular step 10s, but I do occasionally have a little look back and sort of analyse it a bit more and going, so it's like another mini little step forward. Some of my behaviour whilst I've been sober. Because part of my journey, although I've not had a drink for 16 years, some of that time I haven't been emotionally sober. And this is when these things are. So if we move on to step 6, Dave, step 6 and step 7 for me, this is my personal thing, are the engine room of my recovery. Step 6 says, this is the step that sorts the men out from the boys. That's what it says in step 12, in the 12 by 12. Sorry. And some people have sometimes asked me, what are the hardest steps? When I first looked at book 4 and 5, I didn't like the look of when I first looked at them. I certainly wasn't going to start making amends and apologising to all these people, which we'll look at in 8 and 9. But really, the hardest step is the one you're doing. Right? Because the steps, we need to do all of them in our life, in our daily life. So the ones that you're doing is the hardest one. For me, these two, 6 and 7, are the hardest ones because I need to do it every day. I have to become entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And I quite like hanging on to some of them. I quite like some of the nice things in life and might want to be greedy. I might want to eat all of the cake. I might lust after things. So some of these things I don't always want them removed. But when they run riot in me, I have a difficult time. My life becomes unmanageable again. And I've come potentially closer to picking up a drink, which then all bets will be off. So this is where I learn how to regulate my emotions and see what's going on a daily basis. So I have to be entirely ready. So I have to, all of them, not just some of them, not piecemeal, all of them. So, and gradually, because of experience, whenever I don't let them go, it hurts me. So, in a way, I'd be insane to carry on doing that, wouldn't I? A bit like with the alcohol itself, I was insane to carry on doing the drinking. So, one of the biggest things that I needed to learn then, it's the crucial word in step 7, if I can have step 7 please, Dave, is humbly ask him to remove these, to remove my shortcomings. Humility. I had no idea what humility was. It was absolutely, I was confused by it. I thought, it means humiliation, I've got to humiliate myself. But what it just means is being humble, being at peace with myself and at peace with God, and just admitting that I'm not perfect. No human being is perfect. And if I was to put my sponsor on a pedestal, he's a human being. He's going to make mistakes. He might let me down. He might not be available when I want him one day. So I've got to be humble about myself. And when I was living and working up in Scotland, I met this man, John Angus. He was about 30 plus years sober. Sadly, he's no longer with us. He passed away with cancer. But he said to me, and it's quite interesting, on the bit of we've got these steps, somebody walking up the steps. Well, John Angus said to me, he believed the 12 steps, doing for the whole process, is 12 steps down to humility. Because if I've got no humility, I'm not going to get step 7. I'm not going to want to remove it, or I'm not going to get step 6 or 7. Because I want to run my life myself. Whereas step 7 is me humbly asking God to help me remove these shortcomings on a daily basis. That's how I see it. Because they don't get removed, unfortunately. For those of you that are hoping when you do something that these character defects, shortcomings are removed and no longer happen, well, they do. But what is good, and the good news is they don't happen so often, or they don't happen to the same dramatic effect that they used to happen, especially when we're adding alcohol or drugs or something else on top of it. And so it's a great way to be. So these, when I actually look at it, step 6 and 7, they're in the middle of the 12 steps, aren't they? So they are, for me, the engine room of my recovery. of my emotional and spiritual sobriety.
All the other steps all help. Everything helps. I can't just, but these are the ones that have to live in. So if somebody was to ask me, that's why I think it says in the 12 by 12, step 6 is the one that sorts the men out from the boys. So for me, it was one of the hardest steps. Step 3 was very difficult for me because I didn't want to have my widow. I'd like to finish. I want to give Tommy plenty of time, and I know we've got the baptism, and like every good alcoholic, I could talk forever. And I know last time I definitely overran a bit, and it's good. That's the advantage of being first. I've got control of my life. But I'd like to finish with the step 7 prayer, which is on page 76. So, the step 7 prayer, because I can't read that from here. My eyes aren't working. So, where is it?
I could read it behind you. Let me read it behind me. So it says, "My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding." Amen. I think that's wonderful, isn't it? It means I can be useful. Yeah? And everybody wants to be useful, don't they? And I think, because I wasn't useful before, really. I could provide some money for my family, but I couldn't provide anything else. And by doing this, and by, remember the I spoke about last time, that we have a primary purpose in AA, to carry the message to the alcoholic that's who suffered. And that doesn't just mean the poor alcoholic that you might see out on the streets. It could be an alcoholic who's not had a drink for a good number of years, because we all go through life and things don't always go how we want them to be. So we all suffer from time to time, and we have to. For me, when I'm suffering, if something's not gone how I would like it to go, I need to talk to somebody. I need to talk to my God. I need to pray for guidance so that I don't just dive and wallow in that self-pity. And I have to remember this prayer. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jude. And yes, we're going to continue. I can't get used to not having the slides directly behind me, but never mind. I'll try and read it off of there. But I've got my books and I've got God beside me while I speak. So we're going to talk this week about steps 8, 9, and 10. Step 8, if I could have the slide, Dave, that would be great. Step 8 is make a list of all the people we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Now, when I first saw these steps, because in the meetings we had all these steps on a scroll in a lot of the meetings. This one, 8 and 9, I thought, I'm not going to do that. It's not my fault. It's everybody else's fault that I'm here. It's everybody else's fault that I was drinking too much. It was my wife, it was my family, it was work, it was everybody else's fault. But as we've been speaking around on this series, when I started going through the 12-step process, and I did step 4, which was a big step, and had a look at, a fearless moral inventory of myself. I realised all these resentments I had against all these other people. And then I had to look at what my part in that was in step 4 and share that with, my God and with my sponsor, another human being in step 5. So really, my list of all the people that I've had harmed was in my step 4. This is why the steps come as a process. You also get a lot of people, there's this tendency for people when we come into AA and start to stop drinking. Because sometimes we're forced in there by other people, we're dragged in by other people, or sometimes it's got so desperate that we've taken ourselves there. And it's like this, well, I've stopped drinking now, I'm going to go and say sorry to everybody, and that'll all be all right. And saying sorry is fine, but I've said sorry so many times for all my drinking exploits, that, and then just did it again the next day. Sorry had no effect whatsoever. So this is why it's called making amends. And amends is so much more than just saying sorry. You know, it's about not doing it again. You know, and until I got out of the habit of drinking every day to cover up my emotions and everything else, and started working on myself and realised that I had all these resentments against these people. But I had to go and look at what my part was in it. And it wasn't until, as I say, I went through the 12 step program, then started doing step 6 and 7 and asking for my defects and my shortcomings to be taken away by God on a daily basis. That I was then able to start looking at step 8 and 9. And so step 8 actually, doesn't actually say I've got to go and make amends to all these people straight away. It means I've got to be willing to make amends to them all. Not just the ones that I want to get something out of, or I want to build that relationship out. There might be some people that I'm never going to see again, but there still needs to be an amends made to them in some way. And also I realised that, it sounds sometimes like this 12-step process about like beating myself up for all the things that I've done wrong. Well, it's not just about that. I have to remember that I had an illness. Alcoholism is an illness. So I was told by my sponsor that I also needed to be on this list of people that I'd harmed. I'd harmed myself. And that would have sat right at the beginning when I was blaming everybody else. But once I'd sort of gone through the prayer, I then thought it is me. Alcoholism is self-me, deism in there for me. But I didn't, my sponsor and the idea of AA isn't to beat myself up. It's about me building a life that's worth living, that's sober, that's clean, that has a closer contact with God. And so I made my list. I had all these people on it. And I thought, well, actually, I can do this. Yeah. I can make amends to these people. And the reason that it comes so much further down the process is because that desire to go and make an amends straight away as soon as I've stopped drinking for 3 days didn't work, because I was still would have been pointing the finger at them for come on, I've made my amends to you, you better make an amends back to me. Yeah. That's not what it's about. It's about me making my own amends. Yeah? So if we could move on to step 9, which says, make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Now this is why we need a sponsor in AA. This is why we need to be guided, but not just by a sponsor, but maybe by God, by someone like Tony, to sort of I've got an amends to make to somebody. How do I go about it? And maybe actually my making amends to that person might actually not be saying anything to them. For example, if say I'd had an affair with my best friend's wife, for example, going to both of them and saying, well, I'm really sorry I did that. They might have repaired their marriage. They may not have, the affair might not have been disclosed. That would be injuring them. So that's not, I don't make an amends. The amends I make to them is by staying away from them and not doing that. So it's so more than just saying sorry. And I was able to make direct amends to my mum, for all the sort of, the peace I'd taken away from her, My dad sadly passed when I was only young, when I was 25, but I felt I needed to make an amends to him for the way I'd behaved and had not been a good son to my mother. So for him it was a question of me going to the crematorium and just talking to him, and it was so uplifting for me, because this is what it's about. This is about clearing the wreckage of my past. So it's about me sort of cleaning my side of the street, sweeping it clear, so I don't have to keep dragging myself down for what I've done in the past or what other people have done to me in the past. It's a freedom from both. And and it is really important, and I didn't realise how important it was, and I didn't realise that AA is really clever. We have all these readings and all these prayers and things, and when you first come in, you haven't got a clue what they're about really, but you listen to them, and and slowly they become I see. So we have in step 9, we have the step 9 promises. which is on the beginning of it's on the next slide, Dave, if you may. I'm not going to be able to read that from up there, but it says, and I'm sure a few people in this room will know what I'm going to read now. It says, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we'll be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude upon and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realise that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? Thank you. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialise if we work for them.
Yeah, that's good.
So, I mean, that was read out at the end of. It's read out at the end of a lot of AA meetings. Not everyone, but the vast majority of AA meetings read out the Step 9 promises at the end. Yeah. And that's happened for me. But but I did have to put action in. I did need to go and make those amends, and it's an ongoing amends. Because the ongoing amends to myself is staying sober and becoming a better person. And I like to think that has happened over the 16 years that I've been sober and been a member of AA. That I've become a better person. I'm certainly kinder to myself. And I think by doing that I'm kinder to other people. I'm a better friend, I'm a better father, I'm a good ex-husband. When my ex-wife and I were going through some marriage guidance counselling, when we decided we would try again, she described me to the therapist as I was a good provider, a good father, but a lousy husband. And she was right. She was right. And I guess part of me is still a lousy husband because we're not married anymore. But I'm a good friend to her now. And when we got divorced and did the financial settlement, I did the right thing. She was well looked after and provided for. So, and that was good because I needed to do that for myself as much as for her. Because I didn't want to have a resentment about it all, because that would just beat me up. Yeah. It says it in the promises there. There'd be a freedom from that. And I need to have to keep working on it, because it says, that last line says, if we work at it. These promises are there for anybody who works the 12-step program. But we have to work it. And it's continual. It's not about just, well, I've done all those steps now. Don't need to do anything. I can sit down, sit back, and get on with life. Yes, there's a great, So this is. I suppose step 9 is the end of the sort of, not the end of the steps, but the end of the sort of action steps that you do. Then we move on to what we call the maintenance steps. And the first one of them is step 10. If I could have the slide, please, Dave. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Because by me getting sober and slowly becoming honest, it doesn't mean to say I'm not going to make mistakes, that I'm not going to upset people, I'm not going to do things wrong, that I'm not going to maybe get obsessed about other things. Because this is the thing with being an addict and an alcoholic, is that I've got an obsessive personality. So anything that I like doing, I want to do more of. Yeah. So I could, and it can be things that now these things are a lot less damaging than the alcohol and other things, but it can still happen. I could be watching too much sport on TV or getting involved in a Netflix series and deciding I'm going to watch them all, and then suddenly it's 4 o'clock in the morning. This isn't healthy for me. Right? So it's about realising that, and the only way I can do that is to sort of, realise what I'm doing, and this continuing to take a personal inventory is really important, and especially at the beginning for newcomers. If when people find a sponsor, sometimes the sponsor will ask them to send them every day their step 10. Your inventory for the day. And it's not about what you've done wrong, actually. Not at all. It's because it's not about... So I still do a step 10 every day. I don't necessarily write it down anymore or send it to a sponsor or anything like that, but I check in with myself. What has the day been? So I start with, actually, what have I done well today? And it might be, I got to bed at 11 o'clock and I didn't watch all those Netflix series, and I've woken up and I was able to put 100% into my work. It might have been that I made a cup of coffee for somebody at work. I was making one for them. So do you want one? Because the old league I was just selfish. I'd have just done anything for myself. So that's a change. And then I might look at not what I've done wrong today, but what could I have done better today? And then also, something that for me that runs through the core of recovery is gratitude. What am I grateful for today? Yeah. That's what I do in my steps. And what am I grateful for today? And it doesn't have to be anything new. So I've got a gratitude list now that is enormous. My children are on there, all this sort of stuff. But it's the little things now. It's the little things that I notice. Like for example, yesterday it was a great departure. Jim mentioned the party. I thought it was wonderful yesterday. Everybody just having some fun. Everybody mucking in and helping clearing up. And I really want to thank Renata for it was just. I know. Well, can you thank her for me? and this is. So that was something that was on my list at the end of the day. I was grateful for the community here. I was grateful to be part of it. And it helps me to continue to be a better person. Because if I'm mixing, this is what I've read. If I'm mixing with good people and the right people, I tend to behave like them. We mirror people, don't we? Yes. When I was out in the pub drinking with the other alcoholics, I mirrored their behaviour because that's what appeared to be normal. It was, and that would justify my drinking and my behaviour. So I always thought it was justified. It wasn't until I went through this process of doing the steps and then realising actually that none of that was justified. I used to claim that it was my company because I had expenses to take clients. Well, it was their fault. They turned me into an alcoholic. Well, no, they didn't. Because a lot of my clients would go home at about 9 o'clock and I'd still be out drinking till midnight. Sometimes when we're making amends, they suggest you make financial amends, like people had stolen money from the companies and things like that. Well, I didn't feel I needed to do that because that had been encouraged and it was genuine expenses and stuff like that. But I did need to make amends for lots of things that I'd done. I'm not going to list them all out here, but it was the continuing mistakes over and over again and thinking there was going to be a different outcome. I'll be able to go home at 9 o'clock. I won't get drunk. The times I woke up in the morning and said I'm not going to drink today. And by 11 o'clock I'm in the pub. That's in the morning, not in the... And it was insane. But I suffered a lot during that time. So the ongoing amends to me is to stay sober, to carry the message to other people. That's the primary purpose I've been given by AA. Part of the reason I'm doing these talks today. But also, when we come to do the last two steps, you'll see another reason, and probably the biggest reason why I'm doing this. And the help. It's for me. They say sometimes that the 12-step program is a selfish program. To a degree it is, because I have to put my recovery first, right? So that's the selfish part of it. And if that means that I can't go to a family gathering because I've made a commitment to do a meeting, then I go to the meeting and I miss out on the family gathering. That's what I have to do. Because anything I put ahead of my recovery, I stand to lose if I relapse. And this is why it's really important to keep doing steps in that, continue inventory. Because if I'm not doing that, and my behaviour is slipping, I'm getting closer to picking up a drink, closer to letting everybody down again. And then you go, oh, see, you've made all these amends, but look what's happened. So, gratitude So I'm really grateful for being able to speak to you guys again today. Thank you all for listening, and I'll hand over to Tony. I honestly don't think I've ever felt the presence of God as so much as I have this morning already. It's been really, really, really powerful. And, just from, even before I came to church this morning actually, I think God told me to put on a bright shirt, be seen. And the worship music, all, my favourite worship music and stuff and the words in there were really, really hitting me and touching me this morning. How God was working for me when I didn't feel Him. I would think probably the other closest time I was ever in contact with God, but I didn't feel it, was at the beginning of my journey. It was on the 21st of February 2005 when I got to my rock bottom and asked for help, and from that day I haven't picked up a drink, and my life has changed immeasurably. And so I do know He's there for me, and He's always been there for me. And I know through periods of my life, and I know that He will forgive me for it as others have, and as I forgive myself that I didn't follow His way. I chose my way and my will. And we're going to talk a little bit this morning. It's just the right time for me to be talking about this today. So, Dave, if I could have the slide for step 11, Dave, that would be great, because it's what it's all about this morning, really, for me. Step 11 says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him. Praying only for the knowledge of His will and for His will for us and the power to carry that out. He's been guiding me over the last 16, 17 years. Well, my whole life really, but guiding me even more so over the last 2 years when I've been privileged to come to this church and feel part of this family. And you guys have all helped me with my step 11. You've all helped me to get a closer contact with the God of my understanding. And my God is the same God as your God. I was really touched by the testimonies last week. So pleased to hear that Renata and Elias have got their right to stay here. The UK and Bishop Stortford is a far better place with you guys being here. So so that is really amazing. And these are all things that I would never have thought about before, because it was all about me. It wasn't about God, and I was blocking Him out because I wanted to do what I wanted to do. But I really, really, really felt Him this morning, and I've felt Him a lot over the last few years, and I've learned that I need to let God in. That's what I was doing. I was sort of just pushing Him away a little bit because I didn't want Him to. Actually, sometimes I didn't really want to do what He knew was right for me. And He's given me a primary purpose. He's given me a purpose to carry the message. To carry the message to not just to alcoholics and stuff, actually, but to carry the message to everybody. But maybe He's just picked me to do a certain part of the message that He's carrying. And I'm really grateful to have that opportunity. And it's I guess sometimes life is difficult, isn't it? And I can make it more difficult for myself if I follow my own will. If I ask for help from God, normally it gets sorted out. Yeah. In a far healthier and happier and more beneficial way, not just for me, but for the other people around me. And this was a step that I really balked at, I think, when I was, first around and looking, and it's great to see new people coming into the fellowship and into the church and grabbing this part of the programme really quickly. Amen.
And it's just great. And there's if I could have the step 11 prayer day, there's a prayer that everybody knows. It's a very famous prayer, but it when I was sort of looking through the stuff again over the week, this prayer just jumped out at me again and really sums up maybe how I've changed, but this was how somebody else had realised years and years ago. So it says, Lord, make me a channel of thy peace, that where there is hatred I may bring love, that where there is wrong I may bring the spirit of forgiveness. And I need to forgive myself as well, for what I've done. Self-forgiveness is really important. That where there is discord I may bring harmony, that where there is error I may bring truth, that where there is doubt I may bring faith, and where there is despair I may bring hope, and that where there are shadows I may bring light, and that where there is sadness I may bring joy. And when we come on to step 12 is all about joy, really. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is in the self-forgetting that one finds. It is by forgiving that one is forgiven, and it is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. And amen. Indeed, thank you, Matt. And and that's just so true, because I was always, in the those first statements that was read out in the prayer, that was always me. And now, when I read that out, now I can feel that I'm so much more the other part. And I'm grateful for the change. I'm grateful that I found the 12-step program. And if we could have the next slide, Dave, please. So step 12. Step 12 is a promise, actually. It gives us a promise. It says, having had a spiritual awakening, as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So it promises us a spiritual awakening as a result of doing the steps. It's not just going to happen if I don't do anything. So if I don't reach out to God, I'm not going to get it. If I don't clear the wreckage of my past, make amends, work on my character defects, humbly ask Him to help me remove them on a daily basis, I won't have the spiritual awakening. I believe my spiritual awakening started that day when I was considering ending it all, or there was another path. I believe that's when my spiritual awakening started. And my spiritual awakening has been a gradual awakening, and I hope it is going to continue. And I hope it carries on continuing all the time. And it's been a lot. This morning I've really felt it. A lot of the times it's been educational, I suppose, as I've gone through the learning of the steps and practicing them. It said practice them all over. The more I practice them, the easier they become, and I actually realise they work. That's the beauty of it. And that was the insanity of my old life when I was drinking and doing other things. It was like I was expecting a different outcome. Yet I really knew that the outcome was just going to be the same until I changed and had a spiritual awakening. And it's been a really amazing morning already. A friend of mine, I'm going to read this actually as part. A friend of mine sent me a little prayer this morning, and I hear from this man maybe every 3 or 4 months. He just sends me a little message, and this morning he chose to send me a prayer. Right? And it's about a quiet day. This is another day, O Lord. I don't know what it will bring, for I have not scheduled anything. And I suppose I have scheduled a few things today. If I am to sit still, help me to sit quietly. If I am to rest, help me rest patiently. If I am to do nothing, help me do it serenely. For it is your will for me to be comfortably quiet. And I think I was being comfortably quiet this morning. Even though I was singing, there was something else there for me this morning. And I think it's that next part of the spiritual awakening for me. For me, the 12-step process has been amazing. It's whether you want to call it 12 steps to recovery, 12 steps towards that spiritual awakening, 12 steps to emotional sobriety, or as a man I met when I was living and working in Scotland, he believed it was 12 steps down to humility. That was his way of looking at it. And I needed humility, I had none. But I think it's all of those things, and so much more. It is my life, and and the steps, especially step 11 and step 12, suggest that this is my life too. So, Tony, thank you so much for suggesting that we did these talks. I think it's been amazing how, for me, and how the connection always seems to work. We don't talk to each other about what we're going to say. I've tried to hope that I'm not going to steal some of the things that you plan to say, and I, like all the prayers that were said this morning, I know that God will guide us for those prayers to be granted, by how He believes they should be granted, and this is the words I'm saying today is so different to the person that I was so long ago, and that's what's amazing, isn't it? God allows us to change. It said in one of the hymns, His grace changed me, allowed me to follow a new path, allowed me to lead a new life. And He is a miracle worker. We are all miracles. Yeah? So amen, and I'll hand you over to Tony. Thank you very much.